Welcome back to 490 Devotionals. In today's video, we're going to be doing another practice run. We're going to be doing it a little bit different because I know that everybody's short on time. So what I'm trying to do is produce the video that we're going to be teaching in our Sunday school class, but knock it down to about a 10 or 15 minute video, because if there's one saying we do know, ain't nobody got time for that. Let's go ahead. We're going to get started. Lost in translation. We've already mentioned a couple of them. If you guys haven't, go ahead and grab your coffee. Be thinking about that while you're on your way back in here to finish the video while you're drinking your morning cup of coffee. Start out with, let's look at some words or phrases today that may have potentially lost their meaning and or the meanings changed in the translation from its originally intended audience to how we use them or see it today. One of the things that comes to the top of my mind is when it rains, it pours. As Christians, sometimes we'll relate something like this to, seems like the harder I try, the worse it gets. How many of you have heard that? Do you know what I'm talking about? We know that Jesus tells us to pray that we do not fall into temptation. We can look at Matthew 26, verses 41. Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Does that remind you a little bit of what we just said? When it rains, it pours. Sometimes we're going to fall into temptation. Is that a time that a lot of people will oftentimes give up, quit trying to do the right thing? Jesus tells us to pray not to fall into temptation. So keep that in mind the next time that you say that to yourself, or you know somebody that's going through a problem. What about bless your heart? And I'm telling you right now, when I said that, all the ladies in the Sunday school class busted up laughing, because we know the original old school meaning of this was a polite way to say something that wasn't very nice. I will say this, I think that the younger generation are sometimes often using this in the more literal sense of the way it's worded. Bless her heart. I hate to hear that she's going through that right now. It must be tough on her. And that may be something that you've even said. But the original meaning was actually just a tactful way to not be nice. And that's the way it was meant. And I'm glad to see that that one's kind of changing around and maybe gaining a little more popular in its meaning, that people are truly saying bless her heart. I hope she can. I hate to hear that she went through that. I recently heard someone at church say this, and he said, "Hey John, you know Jesus says keep your friends close and your enemies closer." That's not what Jesus said, is it? And my name obviously is not John, so I know he wasn't talking to me. However, I want to hear your thoughts on this. Should I have stopped and maybe pulled him to the side and said, "Hey, look, we can go to Matthew 5, verse 44, but I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." That's what Jesus said. He didn't say keep your enemies closer. He said, I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Either way, comment down below. Let me know what your thoughts. Should I have said something to him? And you know what? He's still around. It's not like I won't see him again. I just kind of felt like it was a snide comment, and I chose to pray for the individual. Now let's look at Matthew 3, verse 4. John's clothes were made of camel's hair, and he had a leather belt around his waist. His food was locusts and honey. I'm going to show you a picture right now, and I want you to tell me what kind of insect this is. As a kid, I grew up in Oklahoma, and this insect is what we called a locust. I spent a little bit of time thinking about this. In fact, I grew up the majority of my life thinking that John was going around eating this bug that I'm showing you the picture of. And it made me wonder, was I right? And is this one of those words that I'm talking about that's maybe lost its translation from the original Hebrew into what we perceive in the English word today? Now I'm going to show you another picture. What is this? And we're going to look real quickly at a definition. And basically, if I'm reading this biblical definition correct, I believe this insect that I'm showing you right now is much closer to the insect that John would have been eating back in the day. And common terms, we may even call it a grasshopper or a cricket. While you're thinking about that, I do have this to say. If you find yourself out somewhere and you decide you're going to start eating some grasshoppers, crickets, locusts with honey, Make sure you tear off the back legs, because you see those little hairs on his back leg, those will get hung up in your intestines. And from what I understand, the only way to get them removed is surgically. So keep that in mind if you're going to eat these little rascals. Pull the legs off. Evidently, they're bad for you. Next thing we're going to look at, and we're going to look at this, and we're going to do a little more deep dive into this one, is what does the word believe mean? Comment down below and let me know, what does the word believe mean? Number one, I want to know, is it a noun or is it a verb? And if it's been a while since you've been to school, a noun is a person, place, or thing, and a verb is a word that describes action. And I'm curious, because I watched a video recently where a guy said, hey, the basic Hebrew meaning of this meant that it was a change in your life. Believing caused a change in your life. And I think he was right on track. However, my opinion differs just a little bit. And I'm not trying to muddy the waters. I'm just saying that we have to be careful when we're looking at stuff. And this is how little things get slipped into our society, and they may somehow lose their meaning down the road. And what I mean by that is belief. A definition of it is to accept the truth of a person or reality, normally on the basis of a proven reliability of an object. In the Bible, belief is usually directed towards God or Christ. So if we look a little further into the Hebrew definition, it actually goes on and says a confident belief and or conviction. Confident belief and or conviction. And here's where I differ a little bit with the young man on the video, because I believe if you have this conviction in your heart and you do believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, and you decide to get baptized and you decide to be a follower of Christ, that action through faith is how the action comes. Now, I also will say this, because I posed this question to the class, and I agree that belief could be a noun, and it's also a verb in the sense that believing is action as well, which leads to faith, which leads to following Christ, which leads to other things. So again, I'm not trying to muddy the water. What I'm trying to say is, I like where he was going with his video, but I think these little things that get worked in are things that could maybe persuade our children and how they think of words in the future. Just like I grew up thinking that John the Baptist was eating what is now actually called a cicada. It's not even in the locust family. It's a different bug altogether. But that's something that happened to me as a child growing up, and it took me a while. Let's look at Ephesians 4:22 and 23. You were taught with regard to your former way of life to put off your old self, which is being corrupted by its deceitful desires, and be made new in the attitude of your minds. Again, this is talking about we believe, we've confessed, we've repented, we've got baptized, we're trying to become more Christ-like. Throw your old self away. Throw that rearview mirror off your truck. You're not headed that way. We're headed in a new direction to try to be more Christ-like and to help bring others to Christ. Just did a real quick Google search. What does this mean? And I find it interesting because this is what Google said. Google said the Apostle Paul tells us that we have to lay the old self aside and put it away because it's corrupt by deceitful desires. This confirms that Paul was emphasizing earlier, our way of looking at life is broken and or corrupted. Our deceitful desires have colored the way we look at life. Now this is Google description. You with me? I like that last sentence. Our deceitful desires have colored the way we look at life. Everybody loves beautiful things, and I, that's why color photography was so much more popular than black and white. Our eyes can find beauty in the color. As Christians, we strive to become more Christ-like, leaving our old self behind and trying to be more Christ-like. The other end of the spectrum, as we've talked about last week, if we use this analogy that temptation is like little links, and each time we fall into temptation, that's just another link on our arms or whatever else, that eventually we'd be tied up tying ourselves up into a dungeon, willingly doing it by every time that we fall into temptation. So if we look for guidance in the world, which we've just read, has a way of painting things colorfully and seeing things that are very far off from its original meaning somehow become the norm. And I think we can use that example I just told you about, where the guy was feeling like he was quoting Jesus saying, keep your enemies close, or your friends close and your enemies close. Jesus didn't say that. But in his mind and through his translation of things that he's seen, whether it be worldly, I'm not sure where he got it. But I know that it doesn't say that in the Bible. But he believes, just like I believed a locust was a cicada, because I grew up thinking that a cicada was a locust. So these are things that we need to be cautious about when we're talking to others about Christ, and it helps us all be on the same page if we're all kind of looking out of the same Bible, the same dictionary, that type of stuff. Worldly things start to seem like the norm. Is that something that you've seen in the media, social media? Is that something that's being more and more put in front of our faces, whether it's the TV or our phones? Think about that. Worldly things start to seem like the norm. Why is that? I've mentioned in the past that if you were trying to run a business years ago, way before social media, way before computers or whatever, if you had a business, you had a couple of ways to advertise. One would be in the newspaper, and the other most prominent way was the mailers. You guys probably remember many years back, you'd get a lot of junk mail. And I've always said, how many times do you have to mail out a mailer so that people will understand or recognize your brand or what product it is you're trying to sell? The magic number being 7. And then by the time they get the 8th mailer or see the 8th advertisement in the newspaper, they're going to immediately associate your business name with the product that you're selling and the brand that you're selling. Social media, etc. are doing the same thing on the other end of the spectrum, and not necessarily being Christ-like. They're selling worldly desires. Comment down below and give me some examples of things that you've seen in the media or social media to where people are trying to make that seem normal and not what the Bible's teaching us. We just spent a little bit of time talking about people who identify Christ, and we have Christ in our lives, and we're striving to be more Christ-like. On the other side of the coin, if you will, if people do not have identity of Christ, will they potentially have an identity crisis? Think about that for a minute. If you don't have Christ in your life and you're not living to be Christ-like, will you at some point have an identity crisis? Is this something that we're seeing in our world that we live in today? Is it something that you're seeing real often in the world we're seeing today? People that don't have Christ in their life or have an identity crisis. Is that a true statement? Let me know. Comment down below. Tell me what your thoughts are. What are some things that you believe could be a sign of somebody having an identity crisis? What are some things that you're seeing in the world today? How the world is spreading these colorful images to our children and grandchildren. They're doing it way more than 7 times, aren't they? Not 7 times a month. It could be hundreds of times a day that they're seeing this throughout their day. And that's why it's so important that we need to be raising our kids right and our grandkids right, and also letting them know that not everything that they see or do or hear on anywhere is going to be right. And the thing that we don't want is them to be looking at the worldly things that are painted so pretty and becoming the norm of the world to be becoming the norm in their lives. My next question is, how do we do this? How many mailers are we sending out to our kids and our grandkids to remind them to stay focused on the true path and the truth? What are we doing? I can tell you right now that the world is beating us with the number of influences and influencers that are out there painting these other worldly things as the norm. What are we doing, and what can we do as a body of Christians to help spread the truth, the Word of God? What can we do? Comment down below. Think about this. Guys, I've been thinking about this for over a year, so it's not like this subject just popped into my head and I thought, hey, we're going to do a real quick devotional on it. I've been working on this for over a year now, and I've got some great ideas. And to be honest with you, that's exactly how this YouTube channel got started. I'm trying to do my part to help spread the truth and do my part that I can. And I know I'm only one person, but I know that we can all work together and share good, positive messages. Here's you another example of things that I just seen recently. And I want you to think to yourself, as I read this, think to yourself, what was the intention that the person had in mind when they made this? Okay, this is one of those little memes that you'd see on Facebook. How did a guy named Jesus find guys named Peter, James, John, Matthew, Andrew, Philip, Thomas, and Simon in the Middle East? Do you think that would cause some doubts in maybe somebody who's already struggling? Maybe they've fallen for a couple of temptations and then thought, you know what, that makes sense. I was an idiot for believing that. Let me know. Let me know your thoughts down below. I know that I've said that several times throughout this video, and that's part of what I'm trying to do, is I'm trying to get everybody to be a little more active. I know that I have fallen into the place of not being as active as I should have. And just like the deal with the guy from church, I didn't go over and talk to him, but I have prayed about him and prayed for him. But what kind of message are we sending, and how can we improve to be more Christ-like? Think of some things this week as you go through your week that you could talk to your kids or your grandkids about. If you have any ideas that you want to share with us, or you know somebody in need of some prayers, please comment down below. Let us know what some of your ideas are. If we have prayer requests down below and you're one of the praying type, please consider commenting on whoever's asking for prayers and letting them know that you're praying for them also. Guys, we can do this. It takes teamwork, and Jesus loves us, and he wants us to be more Christ-like. And we all have different gifts, we all have different talents, and we all have different ways that we can be becoming more Christ-like, as well as spreading the good word. Again, we appreciate each and every one of you, and until next week's video comes out, be sure to check out one of the videos up here that we've made especially for you, and or somebody else that you may know that is in need of just a good, fun Bible discussion. And I hope you all have a blessed week. And until next week, let's read the Bible.